Before we get started, you should probably know that the following podcast contains strong language and conversations of an adult nature. Also, it will almost certainly contain spoilers.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Strong Language and Violent Scenes, the podcast giving a second chance to films that might not deserve them. I'm Andy Stewart, I'm a disgusting filmmaker, and I am sitting opposite another man.
You are indeed. I'm Mitch Bain. I'm a horror writer, an occasional doer of musical things, and a man with an extremely scratchy throat today.
Now I wonder why that might be, Mitchell.
Yes. So for colour, this is being recorded on a Wednesday evening. I returned from Frightfest yesterday, as
We
did you.
both did, yes, we did.
You're in considerably better vocal form than I am. So I'll do my best with this one, but as you can tell, I'm struggling a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't come across too abrasive in your ears.
I don't know, there's a sexiness to it.
Oh, wow.
Just thought you should know.
Thanks a lot.
So here we are, just the two of us again.
Yeah, I think that we kind of just emerged as being the sensible thing to do,
Yeah.
amidst all the kind of chaos of Frightfest.
How's the post-fest blues?
Post-Fest blues are very much there.
They're in force?
They are very much so, but I think that rolling straight into this, I think, is probably a good way to kind of mitigate against that. Because I never really had time to stop for breath. I got home yesterday, went straight home and rewatched the film, took loads of notes on it, then woke up, went to work today, and then now I have battered through my notes again, and I kind of feel like I still haven't stopped watching horror. Because I got here, and in fact, we can get to this. Like, we can
also, nice to be back in the studio, if you like.
Yes, yeah, it's nice to be back at Strong Violent HQ, if you like, after On the Hop minisode.
Yes, indeed, which I don't think turned out too badly.
I thought it was alright.
Yeah, I think it went okay.
Yeah.
So,
if
you were listening to the minisode that we released on Monday from Frightfest, you may have a rough idea about the situation. So we did make a decision based on the fact that we were both going to be at Frightfest to move ahead without a guest this week and do another head-to-head episode. Yeah. Now, as you may remember, a couple of weeks ago, we did a similar thing off the back of a cancellation wherein I defended William Sachs's The Incredible Melting Man.
You defended that very capably, I must say.
Excellent, thank you. Now on the minisode, you have chosen to defend something that I think might come across a little trickier to some people, certainly to myself.
Yeah, I think I might have a little bit of a fight on my hands on this one. I'm not afraid to admit that. I have gone back to 2009 with Kevin Greutert's maligned sequel, Saw 6.
Saw 6. So, Mitch, tell us a little bit about your relationship with this film.
Oh, thanks very much.
A little bit about your relationship with this film, why you've brought it here today.
Very cute, Andy, very good. So, as regular listeners to the show will know, I am not as much of a horror veteran as many of our listeners are, and certainly not in the way that you are.
Thank you.
So I got into it much later, and I think that my kind of gateway films into these things are very different from most of the people that I talk to about the genre. So once I kind of started to realize that this was something I was really into, I worked my way back through the Saw sequels that were out by the time, but they were already out at that time, which, as I recall, were 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
So by that time, I already had kind of fairly specific opinions about the franchise, which, in short, for summary, is that 1 is superb, 2 is excellent, 3 is okay, and 4 is terrible. So I kind of think that 5 and 6, which were the first two that I saw theatrically.
Okay.
And 5 and 6, I thought, as a 1-2 punch, felt like a little bit of a turnaround in fortunes for the franchise for me, which is not reflected in the critical reception for either film, although this film got a softer treatment than Saw 5.
Right, okay.
And like I say, I'm a fan of both of them. I really like Saw 6. I think that it is great. I'll get into the reasons why shortly, but also I think that it was cool for me because it was something that I was already invested in, that I was going to see. And it's the kind of thing that most people, I guess, wouldn't have really thought of. Going to see a sixth Saw film in the theatre is probably not a big deal for most genre fans. But for me, it was kind of like something that I already loved, that I already felt like I had a slump and needed to turn around. But it was probably something that I had a little bit more kind of baseline affection for than a lot of people did. Because it was probably a bigger influencer on my taste than it would be for a lot of people.
Fair enough. Couple of little facts just straight off the bat here.
Excellent, good.
Saw 6 was not screened for critics.
Okay, yes.
And it is the lowest grossing Saw film by quite a margin.
It is not the poorest reviewed, though.
No.
Also by quite a margin, might I say.
In fairness, it was roundly thrashed at the box office by one of the Paranormal Activity films, I believe.
Which one was that, do you know?
I'm going to say 3.
3.
2. 3.
I would say 2, I would be bordering on saying fair cop, because I think that Paranormal Activity 2 is pretty great. 3, I'm less struck on.
Okay, so, look.
Yes.
You sat across from me with a little twinkle in your eye when you did this, when we went head-to-head last time.
Yes, I think I know what's coming.
I think you might know what's coming. You've done a few of these episodes now, so you've got a rough idea of the structure.
Yeah. To be fair, if I didn't know what was coming, then...
You've got no business being here.
This is very true, yeah. And like, despite the fact that, as I've mentioned before, I think I've subconsciously trained my brain to avoid plot twists, this one's quite easy to spot.
Yeah, well, we are going to do a 30-second synopsis.
Okay.
How are you feeling about that?
I'm good to go, I think.
Okay, well, if you're ready to go, let's count you in. So that's 3, 2, 1, go!
He may have died 3 films ago, but the Jigsaw Killer, aka John Kramer, is still dictating games from beyond the grave. This time, the subject is William Easton, the head of the cutthroat health insurance firm Umbrella Health, who denied his claim for cancer treatment. Elsewhere, after emerging as the sole apprentice to the legacy in Saw 5, Detective Hoffman has to protect himself from a closing-in FBI investigation.
Is that you done?
Yes, I think so.
Time.
I understand that I fumbled a little bit there, sentence and syntax-wise.
Look, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's the second best effort we've had.
Behind
Duncan McLeish.
Duncan McLeish, yeah, of course.
That was controlled. It was measured. There was zero panic, unlike myself when I did it. That was a remarkable achievement.
Thank you very much. I would, however, prefer to not be dubbed the 30-second king.
It's a step up.
Fuck you. Anyway, yes. So let's get into this. So I think that's something that most Saw franchise fans will have forgiven by this point in the series, is that these films, especially maybe 5 and 6, relay their narrative almost, I would say, the majority in flashback form. It's pretty labyrinthian, I think, and it jumps around a lot in the timeline. And it was only after I chose it that I thought that could be a tricky thing to relay in a conversation like this. So I'm going to assume a little bit of baseline knowledge.
I'd say that's fair.
But I will probably have to just try and kind of explain a couple of things. But I'm going to do my best not to get too bogged down in over-explanation, because that would be boring for everyone.
Yeah.
And also it'll probably confuse the hell out of me as well.
Sure, yeah, sure. So we open on a kind of typically industrial, grimy scene, which has become a kind of trademark of the series by this point. Not conducive to sterile wounds at all.
No, not at all.
Saying nothing of the massive blood loss that pretty much everyone will endure. I think there's a pretty high risk of tetanus.
Oh, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, like, if you're asking me if that warehouse or whatever it is up to code, I would say probably not.
Probably not.
But, like, this is something as well that by this time has become a staple of the series. I think that there's pre-credit straps in 2, 3, 4, and 5. So yeah, it's no surprise to open on something gruesome. And also the first time and last time in the film, I believe, that it lands on a trap for 2 characters that really have nothing to do with either the A or B stories.
Okay.
So you've got, I believe it's Eddie and Simone.
Could be.
Yeah, they are, I'm pretty sure. And they're 2 loan sharks. And basically the ironic trap that they're faced with is that they have to extract their own pound of flesh in order to succeed. In other words, whichever one slices the most of themselves off themselves in the time will win. And the other one they've both got devices strapped to their head.
They do, they have the ridiculous metal device strapped to their heads. Basically, the choice is cut off the pound of flesh or be drilled through the brain.
Yes, precisely.
These elaborate headgear things that they seem to be wearing.
I am the first to admit that the headgear looks a bit stupid.
It's also less than 2 minutes before good old Billy the Puppet puts in an appearance.
Yeah, which is always nice.
And then we hear the familiar gravelly tones of Tobin Bell, which, to be honest, I watched all of these films in preparation for this conversation.
I find that quite intimidating.
It becomes quite grating after a while.
You watched Jigsaw as well, didn't you? So I'm pretty sure that means that in the last less than 24 hours, you've watched 760 minutes of Saw films. So
Fuck my pathetic life.
So I think that you finding Tobin Bell's voice grating is more on you than him.
True, perhaps. It's not so much that I find Tobin Bell's voice grating. I'm finding the character of Jigsaw quite grating.
Okay. Which I mean, like I say,
or John Kramer, perhaps.
I think that any amount. I think that that much exposure to anything.
Yeah. So guess what? He wants to play a game.
He does want to play a game, and I would say as an opener, it's pretty good.
This is it's a particularly grisly one.
It is, yeah. So Simone is a kind of very slight lady in terms of build,
and Eddie's. I think it's safe to say, fair to say, he's a larger gentleman.
Yeah, he's an ample gentleman.
Yeah. And in 7, there's a moment in 7. I think it's to do with the greed one where they're in the lawyer's office and the lawyers had to do a very similar pound of flesh thing on the floor of his office.
Yeah.
And one of the other Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman said something along the lines of, "What's the most expendable part of the human body? The love handle." So that's certainly what Eddie focuses the majority of his attention.
Yes, I think that this is a good move by him in the sense that you're getting rid of a lot of it, but also the wound is gigantic.
Yes.
So he tries that, and it doesn't pan out. He does have the upper hand for quite a while, and I think that it is fair to say that Simone's at a little bit of a disadvantage. But she does eventually get the upper hand by slicing, I believe, her left arm off at the elbow.
With a cleaver.
She
cleavers it off, wins the game.
Throws it in the bucket, wins the game.
Comes out strong. And it is a strong opener, but it is absolutely a set piece. There is no further impact on this on the story from this scene whatsoever, rather than just a pretty impressive display of special effects.
Yeah, which is, I believe, true of the pre-credits traps in 3 and 4, certainly, and I think probably 2 if memory serves. But you do, you go straight into a flashback after this.
Yeah.
This one is one of the less convoluted ones. It's pretty much a previously on Saw thing where you just basically see that the principal investigator protagonist of 4, Agent Strahm, is killed.
Not strictly true.
Go on.
There is another flashback right before that.
Okay.
In which we see Shawnee Smith's character Amanda riding in a car alongside Cecil, the character who is responsible for the death of John Kramer's unborn son Gideon, and essentially the catalyst for everything that comes after.
Yes, that's correct.
So we get this weird, what's going on here? And then it flashes to, like you say, the flashback of the death of Agent Strahm from the end of Part 5 and Detective Hoffman's ongoing manoeuvres. It's
an interesting choice to mash those 2 flashbacks together, because anyone who watches the series will know that, and they'll know that also that Amanda and Cecil are both dead at this point. And also that their impact on this film is, I would say, probably fairly negligible.
I would agree.
So it's an interesting thing to introduce, and it's quite a strange choice. But yeah, but I think the one that kind of is really driving the story here, the flashbacks you get, is Strahm dying at the end of Saw 5,
which is particularly grisly.
That's horrible. that's a horrible way to go.
Being crushed to death.
Yeah, but I am always kind of stunned at how people don't know to follow Jigsaw's orders at these kind of points. So when he doesn't and he dies, I'm kind of like, well, you have had a front row seat to this for quite some time.
Yeah.
Not knowing to go against your instincts feels like a little bit of a kind of egregious tactical blunder.
I'm going to come out swinging with something here.
Oh, go on.
And it's an issue that I have throughout the whole franchise, but certainly the further through it we progress, when Hoffman's essentially he's our Jigsaw 2.0. He's the last man standing, if you like.
Yeah.
He is building traps that no man alone could build.
That's probably true.
This room that crushes Strahm to death, no way, but he's building this himself.
Yeah, but I think that despite the fact that, as we know, pre all of this, John Kramer was an engineer, I think that
and Hoffman is a policeman.
Yes, but I think that despite that, I think that you can't level that accusation as a sole criticism of this film.
I'm not. No, I'm just saying as a whole, I find it vexing when I see one of these elaborate traps that he's got set up, and I look at it and go, There's no way he's built that himself.
This film must drive you crazy then, considering most of the B story takes place in an elaborate kind of like 4 or 5 room thing, which is kind of the massive undertaking.
See the smaller scale traps, like the very first one we've just talked about, that's these little helmets that are going to drill through the brain.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely on board with them. I was going to say that sounds relatively simple to set up. I'm sure it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine one guy doing that, but a room that compacts itself and closes in and crushes a man to death? Ugh, no way.
No, I mean, no.
No.
Like,
but yeah, we do flash back to the death of Agent Strahm and I guess the re-emergence, if you like, of Hoffman as the new Jigsaw.
Yeah, and they don't push on with that right away, but I think that I genuinely believe that the reason that is there is, I think they previously on Saw is the best way I can describe it, and it was Barry Delgarno Barry on Twitter, used that term earlier, and I think that is accurate. I think that's why they led with that. Because instead of pursuing that directly, we instead meet William Easton.
Yeah, he is a claims investigator for a medical insurance company.
Umbrella Health, yes.
Umbrella
Health, I believe. Oh. Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to admit that his character is cartoonishly villainous.
Yeah, to the point where he has a piranha tank in his office.
I love the fact that he's got a piranha tank.
It's too on the nose.
I think it's gloriously on the nose. He and his team of claims investigators, this 6-strong group of smug millennials called the Dog Pit.
Yeah, wankers, one and all.
Oh, yeah, without exception. Yeah, basically kind of pick holes in people's health insurance claims and
in an attempt to fuck them out of their health insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's precisely.
By the way, fuck the US health insurance system. I just wanted to just drop that in there right now. It's a fucking shambles. It's a disgrace.
I actually think this is one of the reasons why I kind of gravitate towards this film, because I think that I think it's quite admirable that the 6th installment of the Saw series was the first one where they earnestly tried something that resembled social commentary.
Yeah, and they do. They batter us over an hour and a half. They absolutely bludgeon us with facts and figures and information about how terrible the US medical insurance system is, which we already know.
I like the fact, I mean, it's a franchise that's very unsubtle in pretty much every other way, but I think it's quite cool that they tried to explore what was and still is a kind of like live issue.
Yeah.
And I also think that it shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody that they didn't handle it in the most nuanced way. But they do handle it in a way that I think is very entertaining, and I think it does get the point across.
It makes it harder to root for anyone, though, I would say.
That's fair, yeah.
Because as far as I'm concerned, anyone who's engaging in these kind of behaviours as their job, they're pretty reprehensible people in the first place.
It didn't really bother me that there wasn't like there was an absence of a person to root for in the B story, but although that is kind of the first time that that's happened, because just for colour, and I'm assuming that most people that listen will know this, that like since the second film, basically how these have worked is that you've got the kind of A plot which moves the wider arc of the series
Jigsaw story
forward, and then you've got the B story, which is somebody who is apparently a stranger but ends up kind of being connected to the story in a way that isn't immediately obvious, and that's pretty much, I think, done for padding, entertainment and bonus traps.
Yep, I think there are people to root for in this. I think certainly the mother and son are the only people that are really
sympathetic
for.
Yeah. And we don't really fully understand why that is until a fair bit later, but sure. we can get to that. But so yeah, William is, like I say, I mean, I think that I think Peter Outenbridge, who's playing him here, does a fine job.
Yeah.
Everything that's happening there, I mean, it's kind of like sitting having a whiskey, talking about how successful he's been, and one of the dog pit wankers comes up and talks about how if they catch this person on this technicality, it'll save them $200,000. I mean, like, that makes no attempt to kid you on that you're not just watching 7 dickheads having a conversation. But considering that, I think that, like, he's not as OTT as he might have been.
No, I mean, he's not quite mustache twirling level of villain.
Yeah, I mean,
he's very much a shirt and tie, high flying villain.
Yeah, it's not like you would get like a soft focus flashback of him tying someone to railway tracks.
Yeah, he's not got a cane with a knife in the handle.
No, and I think that in a film that I am the first to admit is not without its share of ropey performances. I think that he comes out as kind of like a stronger link in the chain.
Right. Okay.
Over the measure. Anyway, so the way that this is presented and the way that we get the kind of like very hardline insight into how horrendous this farm and what they do is, is that we meet a character, Harold Abbott.
Yeah, played by George Newbern.
Okay, George Newbern.
Yep.
Nicely done. He ultimately dies.
He has refused treatment for a heart condition.
Because of a misrepresentation on his application.
Yeah, based on gum disease.
Gum disease, which can lead to heart disease.
Okay.
I am not conversant enough with how cutthroat this can be to know how plausible this is.
Annoyingly, it sounds plausible. I'm not sitting going, that would never happen, because it kind of sounds like it's exactly what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, honestly, I think that under the circumstances, that's just about enough.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it's an approximation of something that could happen is probably all it needs to be.
I think in isolation, George Newbern's performance in this office scene is the best performance in the whole film.
Wow.
I think he sells the desperation that he's feeling and the kind of... he's got nowhere else to turn now. He's pretty much been left to die without any coverage for any medical treatment that he might need.
Yeah, and I think that, again, and I am coming into this very aware of this film's flaws. Mm-hmm. And I think that the lack of subtlety in how this issue is approached is something that never really lets up. And in a lot of ways, I don't mind how blunt force it is, but dialogue less so. And I think that he puts in a good performance here when the material is kind of blunt force to a fault.
Yeah.
When he's like, oh, you're criminals, and it's like, oh, you're signing a death warrant and all this stuff, it's very on the nose. But it is very impassioned, and I think he does do an okay job. Now, we get, Hoffman goes and has a wee chat with Simone, the survivor from the pre-credits.
Sure, yeah.
Where I think that actually, he's kind of strangely smug towards her.
I don't know if you noticed, but Costas Mandylor, who plays Hoffman, spends a lot of the film just walking around pouting.
Yeah, he does. I think that he spent a lot of his acting career doing that.
And it's not just like I say, I watched a lot of these films. I've seen an awful lot of blood in the last kind of 20 odd hours. He does it a lot.
He does indeed. But at this point, there's this kind of introduction of a theory that the real kind of culprit, the real kind of mole, was Strahm. Because his fingerprints are at the scene.
Yeah.
In what I think is absolutely preposterous, but I do really like it.
We'll come on to that. But, it's nonsense.
So I think it's worth pointing out at this point that although Hoffman is the now sole apprentice, as it would appear.
Well, he's the master now.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. To the kind of Jigsaw legacy and the games and so on. But there is still the kind of the presence of John Kramer's wife,
Jill Tuck.
Betsy
Russell.
Who, again, I think probably kind of coming in on the lower end of the spectrum performance-wise with some of this.
Again, she's given nothing to do apart from, again, pout and open and close a box just over and over again. She spends so much time just opening and closing this fucking box and shuffling envelopes.
Yeah, it's kind of Chekhov's box.
Yeah.
But it's a very obvious.
The box has got. There's obviously a point to the box, but I think it's telegraphed quite early what it's going to be.
Well, he's because you kind of cut then to a video will reading.
Yep.
From Jigsaw / John. We'll call him Jigsaw.
See bald Tobin Bell. I say bald Tobin Bell. We're talking
cancer afflicted.
Chemotherapy. John Kramer here looks like Mr. Burns.
It does look a bit like Mr. Burns.
Yeah,
that's fair. I gotta ask. So Tobin Bell, obviously, he plays Jigsaw. It's the iconic role of the series. What's your take on his performances in general in these?
I like him. Like I say, I've found the character of John Kramer to become quite grating and to lose a lot of the sympathy that you might have for him early on, because they try to kind of make him a sympathetic character. I feel like you totally lose that in the minute that he injects all these apprentices and all this other stuff into it. But I think he gives a good performance. I like when he is John Kramer, when you see him like with his wife and you see him just relating with people. Mm-hmm. It's when he's Jigsaw that I'm having the biggest issues with him, I think.
And see, one thing I would say, though, is, because I would agree that as the films go on, because obviously, again, just very quickly for background, obviously what we know about John Kramer is that he kind of got very heavily disillusioned with life prior to the events of the film when his unborn child was killed.
Yeah.
Was kind of a prisoner of his own kind of apathy until he attempted to kill himself by driving a car off a cliff, survived, and then was re-energized and became this killer that...
Did he not try to drive himself off the bridge after his cancer?
That's correct. Yes, that's right.
So he's diagnosed with brain cancer.
Yeah, and basically, tries to kill himself.
Yeah.
fails, but then kind of comes re-energized with this, what he thinks is going to be this kind of revolutionary treatment of putting people who don't value their lives through these punishments that will
help them find some kind of appreciation.
Yes, and I mean, I really like this. I really like this as like an MO. I think it's brilliant.
As do I. But I feel that gets muddied. It really does, and it just becomes an excuse to be cruel to people.
Yeah, but I think, though, that is that more of a character flaw than a story flaw? Is it possible that as it goes on and it kind of...
Perhaps he becomes more desensitized to it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as his own condition deteriorates, I don't think that it's out of the question that, like, realising kind of that he'll make other people value their lives, but he's kind of on his way out.
But he, right up until the end, right up until almost the moment he dies, he is talking about the value of human life.
Yeah, and
it kind of seems counterproductive then that he does seem so unnecessarily cruel and villainous later on.
I think that there's an argument to be made that his kind of like turning a blind eye to his own hypocrisy about it could be the product of a deteriorating mind.
I'm not going to sit here and discuss the effects of a brain tumour on somebody's personality. Which
I wasn't talking necessarily about a brain tumour. I'm talking about if this is your if this is your MO and you're getting involved with an ever-mounting body count kind of thing, who's to say that he isn't? That there's an element in there that's of kind of bloodlust that's starting to take over or muscle in.
Perhaps.
But I understand that this is a leap.
There's a lot of kind of police procedural stuff in this that it feels like filler to me.
Yeah, I know.
Where they go over the same shit over and over again. It's got to be Agent Strahm, and Agent Perez comes back.
Assumed dead from 4.
Assumed dead and played as dead in an attempt to draw. Is it an attempt to draw Jigsaw out, or I'm not really sure. But basically, she gets shot in the face with some ceramics in part 4.
I think it was like is it not kind of when they didn't know if it was Strahm or whoever, they deliberately kind of shielded the fact that she was recovering.
Yeah, I think
for her protection.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Everybody is so fucking suspicious of Hoffman. Everybody knows it's him. Are they? How fucking stupid are they?
I think that Perez is very suspicious of Hoffman.
Yeah, she was Strahm's partner. She's known him a long time.
Yeah, so I think that she's probably got a lot more of a dog in the fight and has probably got, and I would say that she's probably had more access to more information. And I think she's got a better view of the wider picture. So I think it's natural for her to be the most suspicious. I would say Erickson, the chief kind of guy, seems less so. But I also think that he might be an idiot.
See, going back to how stupid are people that they don't realise that Hoffman's in on it. They spend so much time going over the facts that one of the first victims was this fucking guy who killed Hoffman's sister.
Yeah, so I think this...
And he just keeps kind of trying to backpedal and wheedle his way out of it. And obviously we're in on it now. We know who he is, but it's so fucking transparent that he's in on it.
I think that you've got somebody wrestling with the material a little bit here when you've got Costas Mandylor, who plays Hoffman, kind of trying to poker face it through this scene. And I like how they come across it, like, because obviously one of Jigsaw's kind of trademarks is kind of cutting the puzzle piece shape of flesh off of the victims.
Yeah.
And they realise that it's a different knife.
Yeah, it's a serrated blade.
Instead, and the only other time that blade was used on a Jigsaw victim was in the opening one from Saw 5, which is as you find out, and the one that Hoffman had designed for the person that killed his sister. So I quite like the way that emerges. I like the way that comes to light, because they don't know that Hoffman was responsible for the first one, but it's pretty strange that he's not a suspect.
Yeah. Like, he's still at work. Like, he's not even been put on, like, administrative leave while they investigate or anything. None of that stuff. Like, he's allowed to just fucking come and go as he pleases. He's in the evidence room rifling through stuff. People are coming in and speaking to him. They're like, Detective Hoffman, they want to speak to you in there. They've found something new. They found fingerprints. And he's just standing, like, putting shit in his pockets. Like, no, like, they're all fucking stupid.
I think that this is no place to discuss the bureaucracy.
Oh, right, okay, right, yep, sure. Do you know what else I'm sick of?
Go on.
The pig mask nonsense.
Yeah, so every time anyone who's going to participate in a game, when you see a flashback when they're getting kidnapped, they are abducted by a person in a pig mask.
Yeah, which inevitably pops out a cupboard, pops up, just appears behind them. I'm bored of the pig mask thing.
Again, you've watched more than 10 hours of these in the last day.
Yeah.
I think that that's it's a trademark of the franchise, and I think that like once you kind of set your style that needs to be there, it needs to be there.
There's at least 2 in this film alone.
There are 2, yeah.
There's potentially more than that in this film, because there's an extended period of time when they're kind of gathering the numerous victims together, where the pig mask thing keeps popping up behind people. Be done with it. We know now. We know who it is. Discard the pig mask.
Well, at this point, we do get one flashback that I think is cool. We understand why Jill is kind of on board.
Right.
With the legacy, because she works with drug addicts.
Sure.
And has previously written off the old apprentice Amanda as having been a lost cause.
Yeah.
And then John kind of presents her to Jill as this kind of like, your methods didn't, mine did.
Yeah, but given what we know about Amanda, worst possible example.
Yeah, but she doesn't know. But Jill doesn't know that.
she doesn't know that, but as it kind of comes out in Saw 3, she's off her fucking nut.
Oh, she absolutely is. Yeah. But like I say, I mean, I think that like at a surface level, you know, it's kind of like, because she's very much like, oh, he helped me.
Yeah.
He turned my life around kind of thing.
But yeah, no, I get it. And I do think that is that has an effect on Jill, in so much as she, I guess without ever fully condoning what John's doing, she understands perhaps his motivations.
Definitely. I think that that's why that's there.
But look, what we're here for in these films is traps.
We sure are, and these kick in a pretty high gear at this point because, as you discussed, pig mask abduction. That happens to old health insurance guy William.
Yeah, after he inadvertently shoots a man.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah,
shoots a security guard multiple times.
Yeah, he mistakes a security guard for an intruder, and what I think is an okay fake out kind of thing. He sees this what he thinks is an intruder, grabs a gun from under his desk, shoots him. There's
no word on that poor man.
Well, I think that like, and at the risk of giving it away, at the risk of jumping ahead, even if William did escape the traps that he ends up going through, he was coming out into the real world into a multitude of problems. Because he's probably wanted for murder. But yeah, so he accidentally kills a security guard that he thinks is a guy coming after him. As it turns out, there is a guy coming after him in a pig mask. And then William wakes up inside the warehouse.
Mm-hmm. And we have trap number 1.
And
proper.
Yeah, and it's at this point that we kind of understand like what the theme is of the B story. As in, I think that we all kind of saw it coming, but it's at this point that it's set out, which is basically, and it's where I think the film kind of dials up the attempted social commentary that it does, because you get this kind of explanation that he effectively makes life or death decisions from the comfort of an office every day, kind of like fairly ruthless life or death decisions.
Yeah, based on a formula that he created himself.
Yes, that's right. A metric for whether or not someone is deserving or kind of
whether I guess it's whether they're a risk or not.
Yeah. So it's like it's framed as being very discompassionate, which it is, and kind of like very much motivated by this kind of bloodless pursuit of money. So yeah, it's presented in the sense that like he makes these decisions every day, and now he's going to have to make some, and obviously in much more on the nose, much more brutal fashion, with people right in front of him. So yeah, the first trap here is one of my favorites.
Okay.
And it's, I believe that the other person is a janitor from Umbrella Health,
who you see fleetingly at best earlier on a walk through the office.
Yeah, smoking, I believe. Certainly, this guy, as we're told, has been smoking for most of his life. Again, how Jigsaw knew that information is questionable.
Honestly, don't get me fucking started.
But basically, yeah, they both have like gas masks on, and every time they take a breath, the clamps around them, the big metal clamps around them, will get closer to them and eventually crush their rib cages.
Correct.
Yeah. Unsurprisingly, William wins this one. Mm-hmm. But it's
I have a real problem with the moment where it's bad enough what's happening to both of them.
Yeah.
Right? But certainly to the security guard guy. I have a real problem when they show you him pissing himself. I feel like you don't need it. I feel like it just comes across as one further indignity to that guy that you just straight up don't need.
That's a trope that is overused in horror in general, I think.
I think sometimes you can get away with using the pissing yourself thing, but here it feels especially cruel.
But I would say that kind of like it's in the middle of a scene that is kind of has a lot of contempt for its characters. So I guess I wasn't surprised by it, and I wasn't really put out by it. But it's interesting that that's something that kind of got to you.
It's fine to include stuff like that, but I feel like in this moment it just felt unnecessarily
dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I hear that. However, I think that the way the scene unfolds is really good. I think it's really tense. I like that. And I think that often one thing that, like, regardless of the other problems that some of these films have, I think that when it gets to the actual trap sequences, they do play them out in a way that is really suspenseful generally.
Yeah.
I think that for the most part, that is true. And I think that, again, this is true in terms of like amping up the gross factor. That's something they do in every film. Like, they sound design the living hell out of the kind of more grisly moments.
Oh, yeah, to the point where it's unbelievable.
Yeah. But again, I quite like that. I think it's all just kind of part of it. I think these things are supposed to feel kind of overblown.
Hey, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't do likewise to elicit a reaction in my stuff, because I fucking do.
Well, yeah, and I think that that's okay. I think that like that's just using the tools that are available to you to get a reaction from people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fine. So yeah, William passes the first test. The janitor is killed very unceremoniously, as you said.
Yep.
But he has been told at the start of this that if he can't complete this, or he'll never see his family again.
That's true. Yeah, he'll never see his family again. He also has explosive cuffs on his hands and legs.
Yes, and he'll get
he
the
has
key
to contend with. Passing every trap will allow him to remove one of these.
That's right. Yeah. Cuffs. And again, we're kind of alluding to where this goes, but once he's told that he'll never see his family again, and what is kind of a very serious case of cinematic misdirection, we then cut to a woman and her son.
Yeah.
That you obviously mentally connect will be his wife and son.
Yeah.
I love the fact that they do this, and I'm quite happy to admit that I fell for the hook, line, and sinker the first time I saw it.
I absolutely did the same.
And I think that actually we'll get into it. But I
did it again today.
Oh, cool, good.
I did it again today. I'd totally forgotten about it.
I think that and again, this will come later, but I think that the way that this film manages its twists is really good.
Right.
But yeah, so these people as presented are William's wife and son. They are somewhere else, but another similarly grimy looking room. A big vat of acid in the middle of the room. I was going to say of indeterminate purpose, but if there's acid there, it's only really for one purpose. And a big lever that says live or die, and there's no real explanation at this point why, who that applies to or what it'll do.
We get some stuff between them that at this point doesn't really matter.
No, I suppose not. I guess it's just for colour.
Yeah.
Just to kind of introduce you to those characters. And speaking of characters, you get introduced to another kidnapping that happens is Pamela Jenkins, who's this kind of very sensationalist reporter who's digging into every angle of this Jigsaw mystery. And she's kidnapped, and she's lumped into the same room as them.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, kind of in the kind of final roll of the dice in the misdirection that we're talking about, the son asks why are we here, and the wife says we're here because of your father.
Yep.
And that's all you get for now. I don't want to dig too much into the flashbacks in this, because if you do, then I think that
you're at real risk of getting. One that I do want to kind of touch on is, I think there's some interesting rivalry stuff that starts getting built up between Hoffman and Amanda when they're both kind of apprenticing for John.
Yeah.
There's some interesting stuff there, but then the kind of payoff to it makes absolutely no fucking sense. And I'll come to that at the point, but certainly when the first few times you see it, you're like, oh, this could be interesting. That they're both kind of vying for Jigsaw's attention.
Yeah, I think that it's probably, I don't think that it'll do any harm to talk about how that pans out now.
Right, okay, well, I mean, what happens is, at one point, Hoffman writes a letter to Amanda, puts it in a drawer. Basically, the content of the letter is, I know that you were with Cecil when he broke into the clinic and caused the death of Gideon.
Which was accidental.
Which was accidental, but years and years before, there is absolutely no fucking way on this earth that Hoffman would be privy to that knowledge.
Yeah, I think that trying to put one together would involve, to quote Mr. Preston DeFrancis, a narrative pill that is a little too tricky to swallow.
Yeah, and that's what they're asking us to do here. They're asking us to make the leap and to believe in that somehow Hoffman, years and years before he was ever anywhere near Jigsaw, happened to see this event in the middle of the night with people who, at this point, were nobody people. And a terrible thing happened, but it's fucking baloney. And,
I'll give you the pass on that. Definitely.
Bunk him. Right?
Yep. No, it's fair.
Cool.
That's perfectly legitimate.
So they build it up and it goes fucking nowhere. But essentially he's saying, look, you need to do this thing or I'm going to tell Jigsaw that you were involved. But it's bollocks.
Yeah. Reasonable. And ultimately that results in the death of Amanda, removes her from the equation.
Yeah.
Which, if anything, I think is what this film, what the kind of like what the story needs. his kind of hasty removal of main players to kind of thin it down at this point in the series.
Yeah. Amanda there was no reason to bring Amanda back at all, really. But carry on.
Yeah, it's pretty much the start of the ending. But yeah, so we end up in another trap for William is next. It's one where he has to choose. Again, it's a live or die situation. He's got 2 employees from Umbrella Health, one of whom is a young man, a very healthy man with no family.
Yep.
And one is an older, weaker woman who has a larger family. And basically, yeah, the idea is that Umbrella Health would only give coverage to the young man and not to the older lady. But when faced with having to choose which one will live or die, he opts to kill the young man, which obviously kind of makes
correct decision.
Which wow. But ultimately does kind of like exposes him as a hypocrite. As a trap, I think that this is okay for the point that it's making. I think it's pretty good. Again, it's incredibly on the nose, but it's probably the most astute thing that it does in terms of serving the healthcare strand. But again, I think that it's because it's...
I feel the traps get more and more oblique in their efforts at kind of trying to get this message across.
There's one that I really don't like.
Right, okay.
Which we'll get to in a sec, because it's not too far away. But I think that this is kind of probably... Again, I think like the actual mechanism of it is okay. But I think that the kind of irony element of it is stronger here. And I think that that's kind of something that the traps in general over the later installments started to lose.
Yeah.
So as you say, there's like quite a lot of flashback hopping going on here, and I don't want to dig into that too much because I think that you're in danger of getting a little too bogged down.
It's just to tie up non-essential threads,
loose ends.
Really what I think
But I think that there's one that does need to be there.
Right.
Well, there's one that I think is framed as being more important than the others, at least.
Okay.
And that would be when John or Jigsaw, well, it's John, I guess, at this point, is in the offices of William in a flashback, looking for, basically floating the idea and investigating whether or not his insurance, because at this point you find out, obviously, his health insurance was through William's company.
Of course.
Naturally.
Yeah.
And he's basically, I think, there to inquire about whether or not his coverage would extend to an experimental procedure
in Europe.
Yeah. Non-specifically Europe.
I think there is a country mentioned.
Okay.
But I can't remember.
And William tells him that it will not.
Will not, no.
If he goes for it, tries it, and it doesn't work, then it invalidates his cover, and Umbrella can't insure him at all.
Correct.
And this leads into what I think is kind of one of the more on-the-nose kind of examinations of the healthcare, like the deriding of the American healthcare system that happens in the film.
John points out the piranhas and makes the piranha part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely foregrounds what would have otherwise been a nice background touch.
Yeah. But he's told, look, you're not going to be covered for this, and kind of William starts floating the money and figures and stuff, and John's like, look, don't talk to me about money. I've got plenty of money. So the question then comes to me, well, why don't you just fucking go to Europe then if you've got all this money? Like you're in a position that thousands of Americans, look at your poor bastard earlier who died. Mm-hmm. You're in a position that these people aren't lucky enough to be in.
Yeah, that's very true.
Why don't you just fuck off to Europe and get your treatment?
It's one of those things, and it kind of bothers me that this film creates a logic problem for itself that it doesn't need to have.
Okay.
And it's just by a piece of narrative carelessness.
Okay.
That happens. Because you've pointed out there, and I mean, I'm quite happy to admit that that's a perfectly valid comment, that I think that you didn't need to have a personal connection between John and William for the point of this to still resonate.
It's absolutely valid. This is a situation. This is a situation all across America. Then you could pick any number of these companies. You could pick pretty much any one of them.
Yeah,
and carry the film out throughout that.
And I mean, I think that despite the fact that this is how we came across the information, okay, fine. But I think that it's not something that needs to be there. And we did talk about this a little bit before we came on, and you made a pretty valid point about how this affects what we know about Jigsaw's motives.
Mm-hmm. This, to me, makes him seem vindictive and malicious in a way that he always tried not to be, or it certainly seemed that the film made moves for him not to be.
Yeah, I think that this film hits a problem that it could have avoided.
Right.
And that's frustrating to me because, like I say, there's lots of things about this film that I do like. And I think that when it's doing its kind of healthcare commentary side of it, I think that works much better in the Saw style when it is kind of delivered in these very visceral moments. And I think that where it threatens to slip up are in conversations like these.
Right.
But I understand why the flashback's there. It's to establish a personal connection to it. But I think that you made a point that I hadn't really considered before, which is that the personal connection has never needed to exist before and probably doesn't need to here.
This is also the first film that John appears personally in videos to people.
Very true, although, would I be correct in saying not victims?
I believe, yeah. He doesn't appear with his own face talking directly to people.
No.
But he does in this.
Which one?
He appears a couple of times on TVs talking to William directly.
To William?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's looming into camera. Speaking directly to people, which again, to me, is him inserting himself too far into it.
Yeah, there's an element. I mean, I don't know if that necessarily bothers me. I think that in the other films, there's an element of a need to preserve the mystery of who he is, which is possibly, I would say, kind of less necessary here. But it's a noticeable break.
But this is John speaking directly to this guy now.
Which again, I think, because like I say, I could make the argument to defend, like in response to what you said about this being more personal than the others, and you have no problem with that. The defense of that I would gravitate towards would be saying that this could be how he just came across it. This is how he knows this injustice is happening. This is how he puts it. This is how he puts a human face, a blameworthy human face,
on a massive situation. And this is kind of like his microcosmic way of dealing with it. It's a pretty fucking heavy way.
But I think that is a stretch, and I think that the reason that becomes a stretch, and this is annoying me because this is an element of the film I'm actively trying to defend, and I'm arguing with how the film presents it instead of arguing with you.
Right. No, that's fine.
But it's annoying to me, speaking as the person who's picked it, because I should be trying to kind of bat away your points rather than bat away things that are this obvious.
Right.
And I think that when he's talking directly to people in a way that he hasn't done in the previous films, I would say that like my attempts to frame this as him serendipitously coming across something that he can try to fix kind of start to fade from view.
Yeah. In the past, he's always used the tapes. Or he's used Billy.
The puppet.
As his kind of mouthpiece, if you like. But here, it's him.
It's also kind of like, it's an interesting thing to leave out, because the Billy puppet is such a vital piece of iconography for the series as well.
But Billy gets a look in, though. Like in the first couple of minutes.
Yeah, he's not exercised completely, but it's such a...
he's dialed back in a way that he's not in any of the other films.
That's definitely true, and I think even from the final chapter that followed this one... So it's after this, though, we cut straight back, because obviously, like, you're getting to the point, the segment of a Saw film where you can't go any longer than 10 or 15 minutes without having a trap, and we have the worst one.
I would say this one's the worst one. This is the boiler room.
William's attorney
is
below him on kind of like a two-story room, basically, kind of like. They have a certain amount of time to get her through there before, inevitably, this contraption kills her that's kind of strapped to her. We find out pretty quick that to get her through, he basically has to burn himself.
She has to navigate a series of mesh tunnels, if you like, and they are lined with steam vents.
Yeah.
And for him to allow her to navigate successfully, he has to pull a handle, burning himself in the process, turning off the steam vents so that she can pass.
Yeah, and now I think that... Again, this because we come straight out of the trap that I think represents the metaphor and the comment on it best into the one that represents it the worst.
Right.
Because I think that, like say, I think that the one with the young man and the older woman is spot on.
Okay.
I think that it's the best crystallization of the point of the film that you get. Whereas this feels needlessly vindictive in a way that is just kind of getting at him for the hell of it.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I would also say the same for the next one, but we'll get to that when we get there. But this one, let's gloss by it as much as possible. This trap, it's pretty shit. He also has a key that's hidden inside his stomach.
Yeah, it's kind of sewn into his side. Yeah,
and if he gets the key out, he could free her, but
it just doesn't land.
Yeah, not at all.
It doesn't connect. And I mean, I just want to stop at this point and say that, like, I think that there's a fair few elements of this film that don't really coalesce.
Right. Okay.
But I think that what it does well is kind of its heavy lifting and the things that I think make it a convincing entry in the franchise a little later.
Right.
But I would concede at this point, and it's something that I hadn't watched this for a while, much in the same way as when Preston was on last week with Halloween H2O, and I think when he watched it back and kind of spotted some problematic elements that he hadn't really clocked before, I was getting this a bit with this stretch of this film.
Okay.
And I would say that, yeah, the point that I felt, I was like, kind of held my hands up and was like, I can't really defend this part.
Sure.
It's this trap. I hate it.
Right. Okay.
I think
I would argue, because we move pretty quickly into the next trap.
Yeah.
Which is the carousel. And I firmly believe the carousel trap in this film only exists to watch these assholes die. I really do. I don't feel that it's really bringing anything to his battle, really. It's the standard choose who lives, choose who dies.
It's choose who lives, choose who dies, because that's what you do for a job.
Yeah.
I guess is the point. I can understand why that's on its own is not enough.
That's the message throughout this whole film.
Yeah.
I feel that these two traps, it's lost slightly.
I think this one less so than the one that came before it, but I think that, again, the main reason that it happens is to give you a little bit of catharsis, to see these dog pit guys kind of get shot.
Yeah.
Visually, it's a pretty cool trap. They're all tied to chairs in a large carousel device.
The biggest, the most amount of victims in a single trap
in any of the
series.
That's quite correct.
One of the longest set pieces in the whole series as well. It's 8 minutes long.
8 minutes.
Yep.
Because there's all 6 members of the dog pit tied to chairs that are rotating around. Again, I think in a kind of fairly needlessly masochistic way, William has to choose to kill them. I think that the psychological trauma of having to kill 4 out of 6 of your kind of work
employees,
underlings, would probably be traumatic enough, but it wouldn't be a Saw film if he didn't also have to visit some physical pain on himself. Mm-hmm. So as a result, he has to pick 4 of them to die, but every time it does, he has to push a button that basically drives a bolt into his hand.
Yeah, his hand would be too fucked to press that more than once.
Yes, I think you would have to do it possibly maximum twice with one hand, and then potentially with your feet.
Right,
to retain the use of one hand for the next trap.
You're only choosing 2. Out of the 6, he's allowed to save 2.
That's correct. Yes, that's right.
So,
that's
but
right.
I feel after the first time on the one hand, you're knackered. Your hand's fucking useless.
I would say that's probably true. I think that this actual sequence, the way it unfolds, is fine. Mm-hmm. In terms of effects, in terms of the way that it looks.
I like the trap overall.
I think it's all pretty good. I think that this is fine. I would say the only thing that kind of sticks out here is the overacting of the last guy that dies.
Yeah, he's got a message to get across. I think his character exists to drive home exactly what William has done.
Oh yeah, there's totally this film is, and again for the most part of the film, it's Saw. It's not going to handle anything with any particular level of nuance. I don't mind the fact that in terms of set pieces, in terms of characters, this film is littered with what is basically like moral outrage placekeepers.
Right, okay. Yeah,
where it's like every now and again something will just like pop up to just be like, isn't this guy awful? Isn't what he does terrible? And it's like, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Like, I personally, that doesn't bother me. I think that the film does its worst work when people are trying to have measured conversations about healthcare reform.
Yeah, and
I think that it's much better when it's brutal, because that's what you're there to see.
That's what we're there to see.
And I think that trying to do something like this through that lens is a good way to get the point across.
Okay.
Whereas I think that trying to do it through kind of, like I say, measured discussion is a massive misfire, because it's something that the series hasn't been particularly good at up to this point.
True, absolutely true.
Yeah, so I think that I like the successful metaphorical traps as much as I dislike the needless kind of heavy-handed conversations we have about it.
Okay.
To that end, I think that the only kind of very overt one that I don't like is the guy kind of hysterically shrieking when you're killing me.
You look at me when you're killing me.
Which again is obviously the thing that he never does, because all the decisions are made in an office and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that this film does a lot of good work with the message it's trying to get across. This is probably the only time that I started to feel really burned out on the message.
Yeah, it is brutally, it bludgeons you with a message.
Yes. That is very true.
I feel that this film, and I know it feels like this film's lost fun by this point.
Okay.
It's no longer fun. I feel that the series actually is no longer fun by this point.
My interpretation of this is you'll be stunned to learn a little less harsh than that. I really like. I don't want to jump around with the sequels too much, but I liked 5 a lot. Mm-hmm. And I liked the platform of the traps in that and the teamwork thing. I think that actually probably it serves its overall message more consistently than this film does. But I don't think that the franchise has run out of steam in terms of entertainment value at this point, but I think that this film reaches a stretch where the stuff that I found entertaining about it just kind of put onto the back burner, and what you have is this kind of muddy stretch of about 20 minutes where it needs to get where it's going.
Right, okay.
And yeah, I think that one of the things that comes kind of in service of that is that there's a couple of kind of like fairly workmanlike, in the overall kind of context of the franchise, there's a couple of things that are kind of plain.
Right.
But this is still a good trap, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think that, and it's one that is probably, it's the one in this film that people talk about the most. And it's worth being there for that point, because I think that when you're talking about the kind of the bigger moments in the franchise, people talk about this sometimes. And I think so it's worth being there in that way, even if the execution doesn't land all the way.
Fair enough. I would say it's at this point that we flip fully into Act 3, and for me, it all gets very silly very quickly.
Right, I want to talk about this then, because I think, so the first scene I'm assuming that you're talking about is when Erickson, Perez, and Hoffman go to the kind of tech office.
Some kind of sound lab. They have figured out, one, that the fingerprints found on the eyes of your dead guy for the start, Eddie.
Yep.
That while they may have been Strahm's fingerprints, he wasn't alive at the time.
Yeah, they lack the moisture
and they
of the fingerprints of a dead person.
I think they talk about urea and something else. I don't really know. So they go along, and obviously at this point, Hoffman's still backpedaling like a maniac and trying desperately to kind of pretend that he's still a fucking cop.
To be fair, because Costas Mandylor only has one facial expression, it's really easy for him to it's really easy for him to poker face it, because he's
the Mandylor pout. But yeah, so we get to this sound lab, and what we have here is a technician cleaning up the audio of the tape found at the scene of the Jigsaw murder, which was the guy who killed Hoffman's sister,
aka Hoffman's first kind of solo
first solo Jigsaw ride.
So they are what you're basically and I'm going to go to bat for this scene a little bit, because obviously how this unfolds in the end, Hoffman realizes that they're going to figure out that it's him. And he's just kind of awkwardly walking around the room, as the audio is getting cleaned up. He's waiting for the 3 slowest horses to cross the finish line. Yeah. And then when he realizes that they're going to suss it out, he like shoots one, stabs the other, and then
throws coffee in Perez's face.
Poor Perez suffers a lot of facial trauma in this franchise, but yeah. So but basically kills all 3 of them and then burns the place down. Yeah. This is obviously ludicrous, right? But again, at the same time, I think it's a fun set piece, and I like the way that it builds to it. I think that the tension is legit.
Okay.
And I think that the way it's framed is great, because he's kind of walking around looking uncomfortable. I love the fact that while he's kind of having to stand by and watch them figure this out, the line that they're using is, "Right now you're feeling helpless."
Yeah.
As it gets closer and closer to his voice. I think that that's cool. I think that when he snaps and kills all 3 of them, he does it in a way that is so fast that it looks like it's lifted from a Bruce Lee film.
He stabs her about 18 times, like, in unbelievably quick succession.
Oh yeah, he stabs her 18 times in like 7 seconds.
What I do love, I was pissing myself when I was watching this, and when he pulls Strahm's hand out the bag, and he's walking around like touching Strahm's kind of disembodied hand onto things.
Yeah.
To kind of continue this fucking charade that Strahm's still alive. He's like wrapping it round the gun, wrapping it round the knife. He's like touching all the fucking walls.
I was like, they've already told you this doesn't work.
Like, it's so ridiculous seeing him with this rubbery fucking hand just like dabbing it off stuff.
But I think that, like, what you're talking, I think that this is the point, and it's at the point where it needs to. I think that it kind of embraces the ridiculousness in a way that it hadn't done for a while. And I kind of feel like this is where the film starts to right the ship a little bit for me.
Okay.
Because I think that I understand that this sequence is silly. I think it's fun.
Right.
Because
I don't. At
do
this
you
point,
not?
No, I still feel like it's silly, but not in a fun way.
That's a shame.
It feels like they're still like they've forgotten that they put in the bit about the hand, and then about being able to tell that the hand wasn't attached.
It is a major question mark why he keeps doing it.
No, he's just got this hand. He's just walking around with a fucking hand in a freezer bag. Like, come on, man! Like, the minute I found that didn't work, I'd have just chucked the fucking hand into the fire. Like, I'd have been like, oh well, that's that one out the window. Everybody fucking knows it's me anyway. There's the hand in the bin.
Because he presumably has it on his person like quite a lot of the time.
It's probably just in his. He's always got like this overcoat on.
Can you imagine if it just like fell out of his overcoat pocket at like a company picnic or
It's
something?
ridiculous, honestly. This fucking hand.
Anyway, so Hoffman, Perez, and nameless Tech Lab Redshirt are all gone.
Yeah. I feel bad for her.
Yeah, she wasn't doing anything wrong.
No.
She was doing her job.
No.
She was just following orders. So yeah, we dig into some fairly important story stuff here, and like you say, it's stuff that kind of there's the logical leap that you expected the audience are expected to take, which is that Hoffman knows about Amanda's involvement in Jill's miscarriage,
Right.
and how he used that to blackmail her basically into failing the test that was set up for her.
Shite.
That results in her death in Saw 3. But it comes to light that Jill knows about this via a copy of the letter. Which is
The
found
letter in
Twitter.
question, of course.
So that's shown, presumably just to set up the final scene of that story, which we're going to get pretty shortly. But we get to, I think, well, that's my favourite part of the film by a mile.
Okay.
And it's where I think that, like, and one thing I would say is that on this rewatch, I've always watched this as a fan of the franchise and as a fan of this film, but I haven't watched it in a really long time, and I've seen quite a lot more stuff since then. And I think that I am now a little bit better at spotting kind of like second act slumps
Right.
in things that I otherwise enjoy. And weirdly, as I've seen more stuff and as I've started to think a little bit more critically about things, it's something that really bothers me. Like, second act sags are, I think, kind of needless, almost always avoidable, and something that I sometimes find it can be quite hard to recover from in terms of recovering my attention.
Okay.
So, two points here, which is that when I watched this back, I thought that this film sags narratively in the middle in a way that I hitherto hadn't noticed.
Okay.
2, it also recovers my attention in a way that other better films, objectively better films, haven't managed.
All right.
But you get to the end of Williams' test. He gets there. He proclaims that he's won the game. He gets to the end. He gets to the room where the woman and child are there. You think, as the viewer, that he's being reunited with the family that we'd heard about at the start, that he was never going to see again if he didn't complete his traps.
Kind of is, but only in so much as it turns out that Pamela Jenkins, intrepid reporter, is his sister.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this perfectly fine piece of misdirection. In fact, I think that this is a great piece of misdirection, because it turns out that the woman and child that we assumed had been his wife and son were actually the wife and son of Harold Abbott, the man who died, having been denied coverage at the start. I love this.
I think that's a great twist. I think it's a really great, really effective twist, and like I say, one that I totally forgot about.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that, like, the things that you come to Saw films for, mostly, feel free to jump in on the feedback.
Gore and twists.
Gore and twists, yeah. And I would say that the gore, okay, fair enough, doesn't get right all the time. A couple of really good ones in there. Twists, spot on. And it's at this point that, again, in a way that's obviously extremely blunt force, the Saw twist music starts playing. William realizes, with shattering clarity, that it's not his game.
Yep.
It's a forgiveness test of the wife and child of Harold. So that's what the big live-die switch is for. And Harold's wife struggles with the notion of killing William.
Her son has
no such problem.
No, he has no qualms about what ultimately winds up injecting 2 gigantic barrels worth of acid into William's body.
And he gets burned from the inside out.
Great splatting half torso effect.
Fantastic, yes. Yep. And I think that, again, this is when Saw is doing feverishly masochistic stuff like this. I think that it's always when it's at its most kind of gripping.
This is what we want from a Saw film.
And I think that it really delivers that here.
You get twist, you get gore, all in the one scene.
Yeah, and he's screaming, he's in a lot of pain.
Do you think?
When it cuts back, yeah, it's Captain Obvious over here, but like, but when it cuts back to this extremely bloody and extremely grisly scene of a half torso dropping to its knees and the guts spilling out over the floor, it's pretty remarkable, I think, that this happens in the 6th installment of a series that you were watching in multiplex.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2010.
This is a mainstream film to have stuff as graphic as you get. And I would say across the series.
Oh, it's one of the heavier moments.
I would say there's nothing that really comes close to the Saw films that really gets a massive mainstream release. And certainly in terms of the gore.
And I mean, it really goes there with this sequence. So yeah, William's gone. His game. Well, I was going to say his game has failed. It wasn't his game, but in fact, I guess Harold and Harold's wife and child have also failed their forgiveness test.
Yeah,
although
sure.
curiously, they suffered no negative repercussions for that, which is they're the only people. They're the only people in the Saw series to effectively fail a test and have no negative consequences from.
Aside from the lasting effects of watching a man melt.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure sticks with you.
Well,
and always visual, oral, in an olfactory sense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Good, excellent vocabulary muscle there,
Thanks.
by the way. So yeah, effectively that sequence is over, and then what you're left with is the ending, aka this film's resolution.
Still
of
one
its
game
part
to
of a
go,
plot.
though. Someone's still got a game to pass. And that person is Detective Mark Hoffman.
Yeah, and this has been coming since, I believe, the opening sequence of Saw 4, I want to say. When the wax tape's found in Jigsaw's stomach, he says then, don't expect to go untested. 2 films later, this happens. And it's a classic. It's a dusting off of a classic from the first film.
Yeah, you've got the reverse bear trap.
The reverse bear trap. So he comes in to the kind of observation room, if you like, of the warehouse where the tests have been happening. He sits down and is remotely shocked by something. So it becomes apparent that obviously Jill knows about Hoffman's blackmail of Amanda and Saw 3, or at least that's where it is on the timeline, I guess. She puts the reverse bear trap on him, leaves him to kind of struggle. Now, I want to talk about this because I think that this is a pretty good ending. And I think that the way that Hoffman gets himself out of the reverse bear trap, which, again, for people who have forgotten how this works, it's strapped to your head with a metal plate inside your mouth. So if the timer run out, it is just a bear trap in reverse that'll tear your head open.
Yeah.
I think that the way that he stops this from happening is genius.
He's nothing if not resourceful.
It's great.
As we've already seen.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So just as it's about to kind of discharge itself, he kind of rams it into the horizontal bars on the window of the room, thus wedging it shut for long enough for him to tear it off his face.
Yeah.
Pretty gruesome again.
Uh-huh.
As he kind of screams kind of pretty much directly into the camera with blood pouring out of his face.
Great effect again at the end.
Really good effect. Now, it's not necessarily a problem, just an observation. I think, obviously, this is the final scene of the film.
It ends at this moment.
Yes, it does. Like, this is where it ends. And my problem with this is nothing to do with how this story is told and how this film ends, as much as this is done in service of the fact that there's going to be a 7th one.
Yes.
In the fullness of time, we will come to know that the 7th film is garbage.
I would agree.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that it recovers some of the fun.
Okay.
I would say that while on the whole it's not a good film, it is a lot more fun.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'll give you I don't agree, but I see your point.
I mean, look at the very first set piece and saw the final chapter, right?
The shop window.
The shop window with the 2 guys and the girl. Great fun. Then you get the big set piece with Chester Bennington and all that stuff. That's an amazingly fun scene. That scene's a fucking riot.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I just think it recovers a lot of the things that it does right.
Okay.
But at the same time making a gigantic fucking misstep.
Yeah.
I guess as a narrative experience, it makes
dire.
a gigantic misstep.
It's dire. So I know that, and we've spoken about this before off mic, and I know that you think that effectively this series could have ended after 3.
I do think that the Saw series could have ended after 3. I know Hoffman has an appearance in some of the other films, but he's a toss-away character in those. So
yeah, he doesn't
he's
emerge
not a
as
narrative thread that needs tied up.
No, you wouldn't have had to include him in the resolution. So I think that's a legitimate comment. Again, I don't agree, but I think that if you're identifying possible natural stopping points, there is one there. I think that there's also one in 6 if you make one tweak.
Okay, go on.
So Hoffman survives, which obviously sets up the fact that the 7th film, your kind of main story is going to be this kind of struggle for control of the Jigsaw legacy between Jill and Hoffman.
Correct.
This is a lot of fucking narrative hot air in a film that feels almost entirely unnecessary. Had the bear trap just killed Hoffman, what you would have had there was because obviously in the first film you don't see the trap in action.
No, you don't.
So you could have given the fans what they have been waiting 5-6 films for. Seeing that trap work this film's already pulled no punches with the gore. Just do one more, like a proper great, like well put together.
You literally would only have to see it for a nanosecond and then cut to black.
And yeah, exactly. But that would work.
Yep.
Also, it would provide your story with effectively a clear winner. Mm-hmm. In that Jill would win. Whether or not that's something you would prefer story-wise is kind of irrelevant. It's an ending. And I think that it's one that's way better than what...
But it isn't, that's not Jill winning.
I guess not. It's
that's
just
still
Hoffman.
John winning.
And it's Hoffman losing.
Yeah.
And I think that John winning is kind of still something that I would be quite up for. I think that I'd be in for that at this point. Yeah, because it doesn't do that, you get into the kind of ridiculousness of the seventh one with bringing back Cary Elwes's character, Dr. Gordon, and all this kind of thing. And I mean, anyone with any kind of real-world knowledge of the franchise knows that that's strange in itself, because there was this long-term kind of animosity between Cary Elwes and some people that were involved in the franchise.
Yeah, there was I think there was some kind of court battle, if I remember correctly.
I believe so, yeah. So I think like the very fact that he was brought back all feels a little bit kind of...
lip service.
Yeah, a little bit concessionary. Yeah. And I think that when you are... Well, I mean, obviously it was supposed to end it. We now know it didn't. But theoretically, it was going to be the final chapter in this kind of like horror institution of the noughties. And I think that to end it in a way that feels so kind of blandly in service to something like that is kind of offensive. You would have been able to sideswipe all of that completely. And like I said, John would have won. It would have tied up all the necessary loose ends. And as you say, some unnecessary ones.
Yeah.
And what you would have had, I think, is a film that's not perfect, but it would have been a convincing enough ending to the story. And it frustrates me to this day that it didn't do that.
Yeah.
But I think that at the time, it didn't bother me because I didn't know what came next.
Of course.
I didn't know how big of a fumble the next one was going to be. I had enjoyed Saw 6. I was open to the idea of another one. So I didn't feel like a mistake as much as just something I would have done differently. It was only in the fullness of time and on reflection that I thought it was a mistake.
Yep. So the one little tweak is you let Hoffman die.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yep. You give the fans what they want in terms of seeing the reverse bear trap in action. You cut. That's it. Job done.
Cool. What this film does, though, is weirdly makes efforts to salvage Amanda's character.
There's absolutely no need to do that.
Yeah, there's no need. They try to humanise her by making it like, obviously, the reason she fails her game, I suppose, is that she's kind of forced, her hand's kind of forced by Hoffman.
Yeah.
And then you get this weird, and the only post-credits sequence in the whole series till this point.
Yeah.
You get this weird sequence where Amanda's talking to Angus McFadden's little daughter that they kidnap in part 3. Through this through a keyhole, saying, "Don't trust the one that saves you. Don't trust the one that saves you." And that's Hoffman, as we know. Hoffman's the one that carries her out of the warehouse. But like, that whole scene's completely pointless, and these efforts that are made to somehow redeem Amanda are completely unnecessary.
But I think that is less a criticism of this film and more a criticism of Saw 7, because the fact that 6 sets stuff up that the 7th one ignores isn't the 6th film's fault; it's the 7th film's fault.
Maybe.
So because I genuinely think that is just carelessness. I think that like that's set up in a way that could have been this really cool thing, and this way to try and catch Hoffman out, put him on the back foot. We know he's bad at that.
Yeah, clearly. He reacts poorly to being cornered. And
I think that, and I remember seeing that post credits, quite liking it.
Right.
But like I say, I think that to lay the blame for that not getting picked up at the feet of the 6th film, I think is kind of unfair.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah.
So we're at the end of this now, and I can tell already that you're not sold.
No, I'm not sold. Let me just clarify something here.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of love for the Saw films. Mm-hmm. From a makeup perspective, I think they're superb.
Yep.
And I think that some of the twists and some of the paths that the franchise leads us down are really, really great. I just think that the film hits a massive, the franchise rather hits a massive slump that it never really recovers from for me.
Okay, so at what point exactly do you think that happens?
I think, like I've said, I think 3 is a perfect ending point. But I knew that was never going to be the ending point.
Yes.
4 is a bit of a slump beyond that again.
Yeah, I think 4 is a straight up bad film. I don't like it.
I think 5 picks things up a little bit more.
Yeah, I really like 5.
And then it plateaus at 6 for me.
Okay.
Without ever hitting the heights of 1, 2, or 3 for me.
Yeah.
And then it tapers off into 7, and then drops off further with Jigsaw, which isn't great.
Oh, Jigsaw! Jigsaw is appalling. I think.
Yeah, I think was it yourself at the weekend that said that it just made you angry? It made you straight up angry.
Yes, I think that it because I know we've spoken here about the kind of the original Jigsaw message getting distorted a little bit as the films go on. in Jigsaw, that happens in a manner so egregious that it feels like intentional sabotage. The other thing that I think is interesting about Jigsaw is that it won't make sense if you haven't seen the other films, but it also doesn't make sense if you have.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
Like, in the wider story, it doesn't make sense. In how it actually deals with the story that's happening in front of you, it doesn't make sense. Both as a standalone film and as part of the series, it's an almost unqualified failure.
There you go. So, what's your closing statements on Saw 6 then?
My closing statements on Saw 6 are that I would concede that when I watched this back, I would say that there were certain things about it that bothered me more than I realised. And
okay.
I think that a lot of those kind of come stumbling into the foreground in the second act. And I think that, like I say, I think this hits a point where it, by necessity, just has to get to a point, and I think it really struggles to get there.
Okay.
I think when it gets there, the twists, great. The final couple of sequences with William dying and Hoffman almost dying, I think that they're great. They're very much in the spirit of the
franchise up to this point.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, got you.
And I think that it sets things up to go in really good directions, and I think that it's unfortunate that it didn't go that way, but I also don't think that that's Saw 6's fault. So I would say that it's not a perfect film, but I like it a lot, and it does enough good work in recovering the things that I like about the franchise at a stage where I wasn't really expecting anything great.
Okay.
So what about you? Have you taken anything away from this still?
I've kind of rediscovered what I liked about the franchise in the first place by watching them all.
Yeah.
It hasn't really made me dislike the franchise any less. It hasn't really made me like this film any less.
Okay.
To me, it's always just been a serviceable entry in the franchise, and a franchise that went on a little bit too long.
Yeah.
But at this point was making efforts to resolve it again, which I think was important.
Yeah.
Because it was, like I say, ended at part 3. They pushed it too far beyond that, but at least they started right, well, how the fuck do we resolve this thing that we've built now?
Yeah.
And this is them attempting to do that. And I think they do an okay job while hopping over some pretty gigantic plot holes in an attempt to get there.
Yes, I would agree. I think that it takes kind of like imperfect but kind of valiant strides to fix some stuff and pull it and try to pull it towards a conclusion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'll have to settle for that.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah.
But I love these films, I really do. And
I think it's still, overall, I think it's a strong franchise.
I think it's a strong franchise. And like I say, the key thing for me has always been the gore and always been the invention involved in the carnage that the films put on screen, and they fucking do. And it's a franchise that I know I said I wanted it to end after part 3, but we're at a point now where that's simply not the case, and we're pushing forward potentially towards a 9th one.
I believe so, yeah.
Fuck it, why not?
Yeah, I think that it gets to a point with these things when you read 8 or 9 of something that I think it starts to feel less like you're watching a series of films and more like you're watching like a 10-part Netflix series that's just coming out a little bit further apart than normal. To the point that if you have gripes with an individual one, you can kind of be like, well, let's just see what they do next.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is a good way to evaluate art, but it's our way.
No, but I'm very much of the opinion, if they do another one, fuck it, why not?
I'll watch it.
Let's see what happens. Yeah.
I would say I'd watch it with very, very carefully managed expectations. But I'll definitely
it's at
watch
the
it.
risk of becoming quite flabby.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's quite far down.
When
that
all your narrative kind of threads are all wrapped up, where do you pull these leftover threads from? And they've now tried to obviously create this new Jigsaw character. Yes,
and they've set up a lot of new things that it's very hard to care about. Which I think is the problem.
Hashtag watch Jigsaw.
Jigsaw is on Netflix now for anyone that hasn't seen it.
Yeah, that's true.
UK.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you missed that in theaters, because it got a big theatrical release, but not a huge lifespan.
I don't think I know earlier I'd said that it was that Saw 6 was the kind of lowest grossing out the series by a considerable margin. I don't know how that relates to Jigsaw's box office takings, but I have to imagine that Saw 6 did better box office than Jigsaw.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
But I would quite like to know what everybody else makes of this, what your opinions are on the good and the bad on the franchise, and if you want to get in touch about that and anything else, you can do it in all the usual ways. Facebook and Instagram, we are Strong Language Violent Scenes. You can tweet us at StrongViolentPC and email us stronglanguageviolentscenes@gmail.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, there's tons of places you can be listening to us. You can get us on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course, Podbean.
Now, we'll be back this Monday 8 a.m. BST with another mini-sode and all the usual stuff that you get on there.
Yep, and we will have a feedback section this week. It might even be just that little bit chunkier because we'll include some stuff that we didn't include when we were at Frightfest.
Yeah, and speaking of Frightfest, hopefully I'll have recovered from this Frightfest lurgy that's claimed my voice box this week. And speaking of Frightfest as well, keep an eye out. We'll probably have something a little bit more in depth about that.
Yeah, I think we might. There might be some juicy little tidbits coming down off the back of Frightfest.
Yeah, keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, yeah, we'll be back on Monday 8 a.m. And don't forget that it is better to die a hero than live as food in a world of chuds. Good night.
Good night. You've been listening to Strong Language and Violent Scenes with Andy Stewart and Mitch Bain. Strong Language and Violent Scenes theme by Mitch Bain. Production and artwork by Andy Stewart. Find us on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts and Podbean.